Hey everyone, today we are going to be looking at the Canon Rebel T6i. This camera came out back in 2015. We're going to be looking at if this is still worth it now 8 years later in 2023 for photography. Let's take a look. Now before we get started, I just want to make it clear that in this video we are looking specifically at photography. If you're more interested in the video aspect of this camera, I already posted a video which you can check out with the card up here or over here. There I took on the challenge of filming a short film using this camera, and I talk about my experience using it and whether it's still worth it in 2023. Anyways, let's talk about this camera for photography in 2023. I went up on a camping trip this past weekend, and instead of taking my usual camera, which you're looking at right now, the Sony a7R V, I brought this camera over here. I also ended up picking up this lens over here, which is the Canon 50mm f1.8 STM lens. I picked up this lens because most likely if you're interested in the Canon T6i, you don't have the greatest budget. You're probably going to be buying it used. So if you're looking for a high quality lens, the 50mm 1.8 is an excellent option to get great quality, good low light photos. I think it's a great beginner lens and it's really cheap. Something I do want to put out there too is that I brought the Canon 18 to 200mm lens with me as well. I wanted to also have that full range from wide to telephoto in case I needed it. I believe that's one of the better options as a lens to give you that full range. I've heard a lot of people talk about it and I also happen to have it. So anyways, I took this camera up north to my camping trip and I had an absolute great time using it. I thought maybe it might be a little bit outdated, maybe the pictures might be a little soft, especially low light, it won't do that well. But to be quite honest, I was impressed with this thing. Now before we get into the nitty gritty, before we get into all the details of this camera, let's take a look at the photos that I got on this camping trip. Alrighty, thoughts? I think the photos turned out pretty well. For the people out there who like specs, this camera boasts a 24 megapixel CMOS sensor. 24 megapixels nowadays is more than enough. I mean, the iPhones still shoot 12. So with exception to like the iPhone 14, which shoots 48. But if you're not shooting RAW, then it downscales it to 12 anyways. Basically, 24 megapixels is more than enough. This camera is a DSLR, which means it has an actual mirror which reflects the image to the viewfinder rather than having a little screen up there. One disadvantage about that is the fact that you can't see your exposure as you're changing the settings, but that also is an advantage because it strengthens your ability to shoot manual on this camera, which is kind of interesting. I had a really good time shooting manual mode with this because it brought me back to when I was just starting out and I was using the Canon Rebel T3 and changing the settings, and then I take the picture, see what happens, that kind of thing. Except this time I knew what I was doing. So it was a really interesting experience, honestly, using this camera. I really enjoyed it. The fact that it was a DSLR. So for some people that may be a disadvantage, and some other people they might actually enjoy shooting with that more authentic photography manual mode experience. That'll be up to you. If you do want to see your exposure live though, as you're changing the settings, you want to see what's happening, you could turn on live view mode with this button just over here. What that does is it turns on live view and you see your exposure as you're changing it. So you can see that in action here. If I turn it up, it ends up becoming darker. If I turn down the shutter speed, make it slower, it becomes much brighter. Something which is also nice about this camera is the fact that it has a touch screen. This means you can change your settings on the fly if you have the camera locked on a tripod or something like that, and you don't want to move your hand in weird ways to adjust the settings. You could just go straight to the screen, tap on the shutter speed, change it here. It's extremely responsive, extremely easy to use. So that's definitely a big thumbs up from me. Okay, so let's talk ergonomics. The ergonomics on this camera are actually really good. Again, it is a DSLR, so it's a little bit bigger. So they have more room to design a grip that actually feels comfortable. I know some entry-level mirrorless cameras have absolutely terrible grips. That isn't really the case with this camera. It feels really comfortable in the hand. I really enjoy using it. So I would give it another thumbs up for the grip. I even got to do a little bit of astrophotography where I even had to push the ISO a bit. Either way, I was still impressed with the low light performance of these photos. I pushed the ISO to 6400 and it was still something that I would be comfortable posting on my Instagram, sharing on my website, that kind of thing. So overall, low light performance, it's not like the cameras nowadays, but it's something that you'll totally be fine using on whatever you use it for. Professional work, I would still be comfortable using ISO 6400 on this thing. Now, as a side note, I want to talk about ISO. Personally, for me, I think it's better to push the ISO higher, even if you're a little bit uncomfortable with the amount of grain that's in the image, because it usually ends up adding an effect. I never feel like a high ISO ends up taking away from an image than it does to underexpose a photo. The grain usually gives it a bit of an antique feel, if you know what I mean, except in the digital age. It's kind of interesting. I don't know. I know when I put this camera up to ISO 12800, it is very grainy, but if you put black and white on it, it does give it an interesting effect. So it is something to keep in mind when you're buying a camera and you're a little bit worried about the ISO. Remember that you could always use it to your artistic advantage. Anyways, continuing onward, this camera also has wireless capabilities, which I find absolutely amazing. I'm so thankful for the wireless, especially on this camping trip, because I didn't have my laptop with me. All I had was my phone and the camera. So what I did was actually transfer the photos to my camera in RAW and was able to edit them in Lightroom without missing out on any of the quality. This was actually the first Canon Rebel camera to have wireless capabilities. So it's in that sweet spot where it's just modern enough where you have these conveniences that can help you in these kind of situations. Now, for the more professional shooters out there, the people who want to shoot weddings, that kind of thing, this camera does only have one SD card slot, which is a little bit unfortunate. However, pretty much every single camera in this price point has only one SD card slot, and I've also never had an SD card fail on me, although it was pretty close one time. Something nice about this camera as well is that you have a built-in flash. Not a lot of professional higher-end cameras have a built-in flash, but you can use it to your artistic advantage as well without having to have a bulky flash on the top or anything like that. I know you could create some kind of Polaroid looking photos with the built-in flash. I've done it before with this camera and other cameras as well. So it's always a nice to have. It's a nice little convenience to have the flash built in like this. So before I make my final conclusions, let's talk about price. This camera, the cheapest that I found it on eBay right now, is $297.77. $297, that's so cheap. If you're looking for a camera where you want to grow with it, you have a lens mount which you can grow with, you have full manual control, you have professional features, professional image quality, I would totally go for this camera. It's almost a no-brainer for $297. A DSLR or mirrorless camera, but in this case DSLR, offers you so much more flexibility when it comes to growing your photography as a passion and maybe even into a career. So with that minimal of an investment into the world of more professional gear, it is undoubtedly worth it for $297, especially for the features that you get. Now, if you're watching this video in the future, say 2027, it's unlikely that the photo aspect of this camera becomes outdated, other than maybe low light, easier image transfer, that kind of thing. That's my guess. Who knows? Maybe you have some kind of like holographic photo technology or something nowadays, but it's unlikely. So even in the future, you can have this camera for cheaper and it still takes amazing images. Something I want to put out there is the fact that you don't need to have an expensive camera to take good pictures. Some viewers of my channel might know the fact that I like going out and shooting pictures, street photography, that kind of thing, with cheaper cameras. I also use them more professionally because it gives it an interesting artistic effect. One camera that comes to mind is the Canon G11. It's a camera that was released late 2009, and I just tried it out a year ago, and I was shocked by the results that I could get out of it. Even though the camera is over a decade old, I mix it in with my photography on my website, on my Instagram, in the middle of professional work. It has a really interesting quality to it, and you could never tell the fact that it's an old camera that can be had for pretty cheap nowadays. Now I went off on a bit of a tangent, but to conclude this video, this camera is 100% worth it still in 2023, 2027, whatever year you're watching this video in. It can take professional images. I mean, it doesn't have a professional body. It's pretty plasticky. It's not weather sealed. But if it takes good pictures, that doesn't really matter too much. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will see you guys next time.